In diesem Video sehen Sie eine übersetzte Aussage von Jennifer Fulwiler, ehemalige atheistische Bloggerin und heutige katholische Mutter von 6 Kindern, die sich ausschließlich der Stand-up-Comedy widmet, einer Art Komödie, bei der der Schauspieler direkt mit dem Publikum interagiert und erzählt, wie die Entscheidung, einen Vertrauenssprung in Gott zu machen, führte sie zum Erfolg. Ihre Karriere als Komikerin begann, nachdem sie den Atheismus zugunsten des Katholizismus aufgegeben hatte. Ihre Bekehrung wurde durch das Schreiben in Blogs und die Arbeit im katholischen Radio verstärkt. Fulwiler sagte, dass ihr durch die Erfahrung im Radio klar wurde, dass sie ein Talent für Humor hatte. Fulwiler fühlte sich durch den Gedanken, etwas tun zu müssen, verunsichert, also begann sie zu beten und entdeckte durch die Inspiration Gottes ihre Berufung als Komikerin. Bevor Sie dies tun, denken Sie daran, Ihr Gefällt mir und Ihr Abonnement zu hinterlassen, um mehr Inhalte bereitzustellen. So wie Sie sind, fangen wir an.
If he were here, and he actually thought about coming, which would have been weird, if he were here, I think that he would say that he did not raise me to be an atheist per se. He was really big on this idea of seek truth and question assumptions. Even if it's something that I, as your father, am telling you, question it. Seek truth. And so that would end up being a very important part of my childhood, that it wasn't just we're atheists, so go be an atheist. It was seek truth, question assumptions. And so I did, and as a young person, that seemed to lead me to atheism. I went to college. I actually started out at a very religious public university, and I transferred to the University of Texas at Austin because it had a reputation for being very secular. At my previous university, it was like, they'd have Bible studies and stuff, and I got to UT and I thought, atheists, yeah, this is much more like it. So the college atheists who I hung out with, and really even some of the professors, they were really a testament to just how much our education system has lost a sense of history when it comes to philosophy and the liberal arts. I mean, I would actually hear professors say things like, well, belief in God started because people didn't know how to explain things before science, and that's the only reason anyone ever believes. And now that I have studied a little bit of philosophy, I'm no expert, but now that I've just cracked the surface on it, I think, I cannot believe that people got away with saying that in an institution of higher learning. I mean, have you never read the ancient Greek philosophers? I mean, you might not agree with them, but there's this whole wealth of knowledge that they were not drawing from. And what it reminds me of is one of my very favorite quotes ever, sums up this whole phenomenon. It was the London Review of Books, their review of, I believe it was The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, otherwise known as your atheist relative's favorite book, I'm sure. What they said, and I can just hear the British accent, I wish I could imitate it. They said of The God Delusion, imagine someone holding forth on biology whose only knowledge of the subject is the British Book of Birds, and you have a rough idea of what it feels like to read Richard Dawkins on theology. So, I love that, and that really perfectly encapsulates what I experienced among atheists, even in a university setting. And it was interesting, though, because we like to have these discussions. We like to ask big questions and, think tough thoughts that the Christians supposedly weren't thinking. But I began to notice some problems would come up that people couldn't really answer that well. For example, someone asked one time in an atheist group that I was meeting with, how do we know that it's the right thing to do to be a good person, for example, to just, give back to others, maybe volunteer at a homeless shelter? Because the group that I was with, they were really into that. They really did want to be good people, like my parents, serve the community, give back. And so they said, from an atheistic point of view, obviously we're not like those silly Christians whose God tells them what to do. But so how do we know that it's the right thing to do? And the person in the room who was considered, very intellectual and knowledgeable said, oh, well, yes, if you look at evolution, you can see that humans thrive. They function best when they are in peaceful communities. It leads to harmony, and therefore we have a gene, it's, hardwired into us to seek peaceful communities. But I was sitting there thinking, well, yeah, but you can also look at the evidence from evolution to see that evolution kind of favors survival of the fittest too, the strong dominating the weak. So it seems like from a purely atheist materialist perspective, you could also concoct a moral code in which beating up the weak and the poor and stealing their stuff so that you can be rich and your offspring can survive seems like that could also be perfectly justifiable from the atheist materialist perspective. And when I would bring up these issues, to sum up, there were a lot of discussions, but one summary of the typical response I got was along the lines of, shut up. Because again, a lot of these people wanted to be good people, and so they thought that I was saying atheists want to be bad people or something, and I said, no, I just want to know how we derive a moral code from our own belief system, because it seems to me like you can't. And when I go toe-to-toe with atheists in the blog world, which is always a pleasure because you know how wonderful people are when hiding behind the anonymity of the internet, that is one of the things that comes up a lot, that really sets people on fire when you bring up this question of how can you deduce a moral code? They don't have an answer. I waited for a good answer when I was in college. I still have not gotten one. So, I had those questions in my mind, but I was still very much an atheist, because one thing that my dad instilled in me well was this idea of you might not like where the truth leads you, it might not be comfortable, but you follow the truth nonetheless. We look for what is true, not what makes us feel good. And so I was concerned about these issues of moral code, but in the spirit of seeking truth, I was still committed to being an atheist. The first thing that just made me really question even more than I already had been, that made me start to consider at least theism, was when I met the man who is now my husband. So he has an interesting story. He was raised by a single mother, grew up very, very poor, so much so that they often couldn't even afford to run the heat in the winter, which is sad, but it was Texas. I mean, it wasn't like, here. And so her big thing, because she grew up in poverty, like no running water poverty. And so her big thing was, you've got to get out of poverty, you've got to seek success. And she had heard on like movies and TV shows of these places called like Yale and Harvard. And so knowing nothing about it, the blind leading the blind here, she was like, well, I think you should go to one of these schools. And my husband had never heard of him. He was just a kid from, small town Texas. And he said, okay, I guess I will. And so he went to Yale undergrad, graduated with honors, Columbia Law School, Stanford Business School, and did most of the coursework towards a master's in computer science while he was at Stanford. So no one could say he wasn't a pretty smart guy. So after we started dating, and I just assumed he was an atheist because, atheism is for the intelligentsia, right? I very much bought into that stereotype. And so one day something about the subject of religion came up, and he I forget what it was, but he said something that indicated that he believed in God. And I said, God, whoa, what was that? Wow, that's crazy. And then he said the C word. He said he considered himself a Christian. I was just, it was like, this is a dream, my bad dream, I need to wake up now. I couldn't believe what he had just said. And so, but one of my first questions was a natural question. I was like, well, I have never seen you go to church. I have never seen you read the Bible. And, this is Austin. So he's like, oh, no, but I'm a Christian. You don't need to do anything, pray, go to church. Like, no, I'm still a Christian. Because he had a really profound experience. He did a full dunk baptism in a Baptist church when he was 13. And he said, I experienced something, and I know Christ is real. And I have no idea what to do about it, but I know that that he is real. And so I met some of his friends, some of these people who, from law school, so these people had degrees that I could not even pronounce. And some of them claimed to be Christian, people who their intellects blew me away. And so that was the first time that I had to let go of that silly stereotype that smart people aren't religious. And looking back, when I first gave this talk, I actually didn't even mention that, because now it sounds so ignorant to say that I actually believed that smart people are never religious, but that's the thing when you buy into stereotypes. I mean, stereotypes always come from, you have this little worldview and you want to protect it, and so you make a stereotype so that everything in your world fits very neatly within your perception, and you just get further and further into it. You further and further isolate yourself from reality. So that's what I had done, and hanging out with these really intellectual, really smart people was the first time that I thought, okay, I need to stop saying that belief in God is insane. I need to stop saying that no reasonable person could ever believe in God, because these people are really smart. They are very reasonable, and they believe in God. I didn't think they were right, but that was a first step. I let go of those silly stereotypes. So Joe and I got married, and this confirmed for me that he wasn't that religious, because we decided to reinvent the wheel on the wedding. We got married in a theater, and I wore a dark purple dress, and we had all these ideas. We were gonna sign a contract, and we wrote our own vows. It was kind of a mess. But we learned a valuable lesson, one that I hope none of your children ever need to know. But if you are going to reinvent the wheel on a 2,000-year-old tradition or older, you might want to rehearse it first, because for all of these ideas about what our wedding was going to be like, we never timed it. And so we had all of these people that Joe knew flying in from all over the world. And I get up on the stage and I have a dark purple dress on, and it was only 7 minutes because we kind of didn't time that. And so as I was walking out, people were like, so I just flew in from London for she just walked up there and now it's done. So anyway, little lesson learned on when you go against thousands and thousands of years of tradition. So a year later, our first child was born, and that was the real starting point of my conversion. You can see that the stage had kind of already been set. I was already thinking a certain direction. But when I held that baby, that was the first moment of realizing that there were some real problems with atheism and that it was time to address them. Because, in the spirit of another thing that my dad always taught me was this idea of follow your beliefs to their logical conclusions. Don't just say you believe something, but then don't walk the walk when the going gets tough. You have to follow your belief to their logical conclusions. And so I held my newborn son, this amazing miracle, and I was like, what a gorgeous...
Wenn Ihnen dieser Inhalt gefallen hat und Sie weiterhin mit uns lernen und reflektieren möchten, laden wir Sie ein, unseren Kanal zu abonnieren und dieses Video mit Gefällt mir zu markieren. Ihre Unterstützung ermöglicht es uns, weiterhin Gedanken auszutauschen und zu lernen. Vielen Dank, dass Sie Teil unserer Community sind. Vergessen Sie nicht, dieses Video mit Ihren Freunden und Ihrer Familie zu teilen. Bis zum nächsten Mal.